Hello and welcome to Transform Your Retail Training, Why the Traditional LMS Isn't Working and How to Fix It. Today's webinar is brought to you by our good partner Axonify and produced by SmartBrief. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from SmartBrief and I'm excited to be your moderator for this especially timely presentation. Now, before we get to today's great session, we do have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this webinar. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we highly encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. So feel free to test it out by typing a hello in there. We love to see where you're logging in from. Now, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll get into as many of your questions as we can, but type them in as you have them. If a great question comes in during the session, we'll break in and address that question. So that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to a retail employee engagement playbook. So I encourage you to access that resource now and feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. I'll also note that this event is being recorded and we'll share the recording with you in the coming days. Now, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Okay, so I want to take a couple of minutes to thank Axonify for putting together a compelling webinar today. Axonify is the frontline forward learning and enablement platform used by companies like Walmart, Kroger, and Foot Locker. Over the last 10 years, they've partnered with retailers and grocers across the world to understand how to truly drive high performance. Over 3.7 million users in more than 160 countries use Axonify to onboard and train in 5 minutes a day. So no break room required. It makes use of bite-sized microlearning, custom and personalized training, gamified content, embedded communication, and more. So they're revolutionizing the way frontline workers learn, connect, and get things done. It's fast, simple, and fits into the flow of their work to get associates onboarded, engaged, and ready for core tasks as quickly as possible. So our featured presenter today is Carol Lehman, CEO and co-founder of Axonify. Carol's an award-winning thought leader and an expert on frontline enablement. Previously, Carol was the CEO of PostRank Inc., a social engagement analytics platform that was acquired by Google. She was also the CEO of several other technology firms, including RSS Solutions and Fake Space Systems. So Carol's a celebrated entrepreneur and trailblazer. Her articles appear in leading learning, business, and technology publications. So let me bring Carol on. Carol, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, Scott. I really appreciate that warm introduction. So before I dive into the content, I did want to ask the audience, and it's great to see so many people from so many different locations joining. How many of you have worked in frontline roles throughout your careers? I have to say, most, if you want to put in the chat, any of the frontline roles that you've had, really interested to hear what people have done. I know, like me, I would say most people I know, certainly as a teenager, their first job often had to do with something in frontline. So let us know what you've done on your way to the role that you have today.
Yeah, I had one. I put it in there. I was a grocery store bagger between my senior year at high school and freshman year of college. So, yep.
Amazing, amazing. What else do we have?
Let's see. That's it so far. Come on, put those answers in there. We want to see where you were. Was it McDonald's? Was it,
Yeah, well,
Uh,
and I can tell you, having asked this question many times before, I hear about frontline jobs that are so incredibly interesting and things that you would never in a million years expect people to have done. Or when you think about frontline roles, you often think about retail and grocery and things like that. But there's just such an incredible array of the types of jobs that frontline workers do. And so, as you think about the breadth of all of that, we're going to talk today about how you, as a learning leader or somebody who is thinking about enablement of frontline, can use technology to really make a difference. And as part of that, why traditional LMS solutions are typically not well suited to reaching the frontline. And the reason for that is frontline work is fundamentally different from what we do now as ourselves as leaders in organizations every day. Scott mentioned that we at Exonify work with almost 4 million frontline workers, and that's really actually a drop in the bucket compared to the frontline population globally and in North America. In North America, about 70% of the workforce is frontline in some sort of customer facing or fulfillment or many other types of roles. Globally, that is 80%. So billions of people work on the front line globally every single day. And so when you think about the characteristics of that, as opposed to a corporate workforce, those roles tend to be more highly specialized, and individuals, fewer in number, occupy those roles in the corporate environment. Whereas in large frontline populations, those organizations tend to be a whole lot flatter hierarchically. And many people, hundreds to, in some cases, tens of thousands of people, have exactly the same job. And so it does need to be kept in mind as we think about designing the frontline experience. So that's really, what's displayed here on the slide. There is a very big difference in all of the things that we're going to talk about today when you think about your corporate employees versus your frontline. So, thinking a little bit more about the attributes the frontline persona has, and those of you who have worked in frontline roles or serve the frontline in your organizations will know many of these things. It is the case that, especially as the organization gets larger, these workers are distributed across locations, across geographies, across countries sometimes. And that can also look very different. So if you take an organization like O'Reilly Auto Parts, somebody we work with, for example, they have 6,000 locations in just 2 countries. And so that gives you an idea of the number of locations they have in a reasonably contained geography. But then by contrast, if you look at Foot Locker, they have 2,500 stores, so just less than half of O'Reilly, but they're in 40 countries. And you can start to see how distributed workforces can look very different and mean that there are unique challenges reaching those people in timely, reliable, and consistent ways with the right training. So we have to consider that geographical spread. We also have to consider that day-to-day frontline workers are very mobile, or deskless, as we like to call it. They aren't sitting in one place. They're in the store, serving a customer, in the distribution center, fulfilling an order. They're stocking shelves. They're doing all kinds of different things that mean they're not sitting at a desk. And due to that deskless nature, they spend less time on and have less access to iPads, laptops, all of the things that mean they're very difficult to reach in the moments that matter. Associates also typically, given the roles that they have, don't have the autonomy to step away from their assigned tasks to complete training or focus on their professional development. Those activities often have to be scheduled and take away from time on the clock. And then finally, with the scale of this workforce comes great diversity, including languages, different cultural aspects, motivations or purpose that they have, the support needs that they have, and the depth of experience that they bring, each and every one of them, to their roles. So the question becomes, how well in our organizations do we understand associates on the front line? Do we really understand that and consider it when designing learning for that segment of the population? So here's what happens when we don't keep these factors in mind. We leave people to figure things out on their own, and that includes managers, who are one of the most critical parts of the front line. Yes, managers have a bit more autonomy, that's for sure, but they also live the frontline experience alongside the associates. And in particular, there are two training opportunities or moments that it turns out are utterly essential when we think about how to enable managers and when we're designing learning for the frontline. So in the interest of not pausing, I was going to ask, does anyone know what those two training moments are? But I'll tell you, they are, in our experience, onboarding and when you have compliance needs. And compliance can be regulatory compliance or simply compliance with standard operating procedures. A lot of training takes place in these moments or with these two different types of training needs, because first, they're intended to get people knowing what to do day to day. And second, you need to make sure that they stay safe, comply with regulatory procedures, and that might eliminate safety risks, for example, in the workplace, and essentially keep the business operating the way that it should. The unfortunate thing is that we try to cram in as much information into those limited moments as we can. And the reality is that that kind of one and done fire hose training is very typical of standard traditional LMS, and it's fundamentally flawed. And this ineffectiveness is severely impacting both managers and the people they manage and their ability to do their jobs well. In fact, and I'll allude to this later, we do a survey every year, and pretty consistently, half of frontline managers tell us they are burned out every single day because of the number of things that they have to figure out on the fly, people issues that they have to manage, and they don't feel well trained to manage. So if you are genuinely interested in driving performance and reducing turnover, make sure that you take note of the checklist I'm going to share at the end of the webinar. So let's take a moment to debunk the common perception that frontline roles are entry level or suited for teenagers or students. You all know that's not true. A quick visit to any grocery store is going to show that they have a very diverse team, typically from students who are gaining valuable experience to seasoned frontline professionals who are experts in their departments. And these individuals collectively shape the customer experience that your customers are having, whether they're directly customer facing or working in distribution centers. So supporting each of those workers in ways that allow them to do their very best every single day is crucial to providing exceptional service and achieving the operational success that you're intending to achieve. So the question is, how do we enable the frontline effectively to make them feel comfortable, capable, and confident on the job? And how are modern ways of thinking about that and using technology that is purpose-built for the frontline going to transform the experience that your people and your customers, in many cases, are having? So we're going to break this down into the 5 biggest barriers that your LMS needs to overcome to best serve the frontline workforce. And these challenges, if unaddressed, really are going to short circuit your ability to enable the frontline in a way that is best going to serve your business. I'm going to share how technology and a modern approach is going to fix the various gaps that are there. And I'm going to give you several examples in real life of organizations that have overcome these challenges and achieved really great results. And so my hope is that you leave today with that valuable checklist that you can share with your team and your technology partners, and really have you think about how to improve the frontline digital experience so you can better support their needs. So before we get started, I would like to quickly poll the audience for your biggest challenges. So if you can answer the question that's on the slide right now and let us know what you're experiencing in your own workplaces, that would be terrific.
Yeah, so the question there, what's the biggest challenge you face in delivering training to your frontline employees? Lots of options here. Limited time for training, difficulty engaging employees in training, lack of relevant training content, inadequate technology, resistance to change. We've got a clear leader here, but a couple others coming in, so we'll give that a moment to stew. And meanwhile, Carol, we did have some responses on the frontline jobs. We had a cashier, a short line cook, somebody who was a team member to store manager, and everything in between. Going to your point about they're not all entry level people. The store manager can be frontline. My sister-in-law is a Barnes & Noble store manager, and she's definitely frontline. Yeah,
Definitely. Amazing. Well, yes, there is a clear winner. Limited time for training being bad. And I'm going to touch on actually that particular issue in some of what I'm going to say. And we'll touch on actually all of these things, as I go through. And if you have any questions at all, please do ask. So very, very interesting. Well, the first thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of challenge is access. More often than not, organizations are challenged that have large frontline populations are challenged to provide easy access to knowledge and information in the flow of work. And in fact, in retail, many retailers, for example, don't provide email addresses to their workforce just because of the rate of turnover. It's just too difficult to manage. And so reaching the workforce in the moments that matter often just doesn't happen. And we'll look at a distribution center example. So in a typical DC environment, many of you may know, shifts are often 24/7 throughout the week. Heavy equipment is used to pick and ship products, and that creates a whole host of safety risks. These facilities can be massive, absolutely huge, millions of square feet, and often don't have the greatest Wi-Fi networks. Maybe there's a dedicated training room with some computers. Maybe there's a kiosk in the break room that people can access, usually to pull up their schedules. Sometimes there are location trainers, but those trainers tend to spend a lot of time doing onboarding with new hires. And then the management team is often very typically busy with their operational objectives. So they're focused on things other than ongoing learning and development programs day in and day out. And so that's where technology comes in. How can we use it to reach frontline employees in an environment like a distribution center so that people have access to the right training just when they need it? In other words, how do we make information and knowledge easily accessible and meet the employee where they are? Well, the good news is that more and more organizations are realizing that allowing access to for employees to find what they need to perform in the flow of work means a huge boost to productivity and to reducing expenses such as safety incidents. It has a whole host of very positive business impacts when you give people the information they need when they need it in the flow of work. And the reality is frontline operations already leverage in many cases a wide variety of devices for other purposes that can then be multi-purposed to enable the frontline in continuous ways. So for example, I know some of you have Zebra devices, Zebra handheld devices. There are point of sale terminals or iPads, tablets to check out customers. There are personal smartphones allowed in some environments, sometimes owned by the organization, sometimes the individual. And all of these can be ways that are access points for the frontline. So as you're designing your flexible learning program, you need to be thinking about how that gets delivered across devices and in ways that are most comfortable and easy for the workforce. So not only are organizations increasingly, we're seeing this pretty tremendously, allowing employees to bring their own devices, they are also allowing them to choose their own device. So if you make several available to them, they can choose which access point that they want to use to get that knowledge and information. And that's just a really positive evolution of enabling frontline employees to be able to do their best every day. Interestingly, another technical capability that is increasingly important is adaptive streaming, which pairs with the idea that if you're going to allow anytime, anywhere access to information in an environment that may not have the best connectivity, adaptive streaming allows technology to adjust the content quality to fit the bandwidth available to that individual when they need it. So sometimes devices like point of sale terminals are designed to restrict bandwidth to specific activities, and that often doesn't leave enough time or ability to load things like videos. So what you're trying to do with this idea of adaptive streaming is eliminate those barriers and help with the experience to change content quality to make sure that it is as easy as possible for the employee. Another technique that's gained traction recently is the use of QR codes. They've become a really great way of helping associates find what they need in the moment rather than navigating a labyrinth of intranet systems or HR platforms. And they reduce the amount of time and the number of clicks to find what they need. And so it dramatically reduces adoption rates in terms of people actively looking to get the information that they need. People, interestingly, human behavior, and we have studied a bunch of brain science around this, people in the absence of knowing tend just not to do. And they either don't do it or they will guess at doing it. And you don't want either one of those situations. So being able to have information right there, QR codes being one technique, is incredibly powerful to get the associate to do what they need to do in that moment of need. The last thing I'll say about tech capability is it's just the speed to the resource. If the information they need is hidden really deeply inside your LMS or another platform, they will likely not find it and they'll do exactly what I just said. So embedding links to your learning platform in operational tools that they're using every single day will mean that your adoption of learning, your adoption of finding information is going to go through the roof. And we certainly see that here. So my tip, the point of all of this is to really understand your company device policies, what hardware is used with your frontline, and what are the opportunities there to reach that very difficult to reach audience. So I'm going to stop there and take a moment to see if you have any questions from the audience about any of that, Scott.
Yeah, we do have a question here. Someone's wondering, how do you engage older employees who are less tech savvy?
You know, that's a great question. We constantly look at our data in terms of usage and participation. And there are lots of misconceptions out there about the different demographics and their proclivity to adopt technology. And if you make the experience really intuitive for the user, fast, relevant for them, we have not been able to discern any significant differences with particular age groups, genders, job roles. It all has to do with the experience. And, the reality is technology is just so prevalent in our personal lives today that, people almost expect it, and it's not an issue at all. All right. Well, thank you for that question. So back to our example, to kind of illustrate all of this, we were tasked with helping a major retailer with their distribution center operations. And when we first got started, we went looking for potential access points in the flow of work. And we found that there were a few training PCs in a room tucked away, but very few employees ever managed to find their way to that room, even when there was required training to do, which was interesting. So we looked at the workflow and optimized the experience. And an example of that were the lift truck drivers. And we found that during every shift, a lift truck driver had to charge the battery on the lift truck for 10 minutes at a battery charging station. So all we suggested was that they move one of those PCs to the charging station. And while that individual is charging the battery, they could engage in a few minutes of highly targeted learning. And what's really cool about that example is that 9 years later, 95% of their 100,000 person supply chain team complete on average a minimum of 2 training sessions a week. So literally by just moving a device close to something that was in the workflow, they got this massive level of participation, which led to a massive business outcome that I'm going to mention later. So let's jump to barrier number 2, the learning experience itself. You might make it accessible for the frontline, but is the experience when they get there going to be engaging and effective for the audience that you're targeting? And, this goes to one of the things that the poll elevated. And that was, we all know frontline employees have very limited time to dedicate to things considered to be outside of their core tasks. So if we want people who are on the clock, already overloaded with things to do, to engage in learning, and in many cases do it voluntarily, we need to make that experience fast, relevant, and intuitive. And so, think about this. How many training courses have been directed at you, at me, those of us, and how difficult it was to get through some of that content? How many clicks did it take? Now, compare that to how easy it is when we go to find something online or on YouTube, a video on YouTube, what that takes. It takes just a few clicks and literally almost in seconds, you can find what you want. So what's happened is our personal experiences online have really set the bar for the digital content experience that we want at work. And unfortunately, traditional LMS solutions take a lot of clicks. They tend to have very long form content, and associates don't have the patience, don't have the time, and they start to drop off within, a very short period of time. And particularly if they're looking for something that isn't mandated, they may give up, and that's going to impact their performance in that moment of need. So if they need information to do their jobs well, you don't want them guessing. You don't want them stopping looking for it. You want them to perceive it to be really easy so that it becomes a daily habit. Here are 2 other examples just related to that from one of our grocery customers. This organization realized a number of things. There were so many topics being directed to their deli associates, and including things like the machinery and how to operate it. And as many of you know, slicing meat is a dangerous activity. And can impact things like customer quality, if it's not sliced well, not packaged well. And things like daily promotions, particular things that they wanted those associates to promote and be aware of so that they could increase sales. And so that organization realized putting the knowledge and information on the deli machine itself was a really easy way in a couple of clicks for the associates to access the relevant knowledge immediately. So if they had a question about what to do with the machine, they could find it literally in seconds, or a particular promotion or anything else. Huge impact to their business outcomes, actually. The second example, same organization, was a bakery associate who was tasked with making a batch of what they called the cake of the week. And when she came into work, she had seen the printed flyer distributed to customers. And instead of pulling out the recipe card the old-fashioned way, and those cards got lost, they got damaged. And normally, you look at the flyer, then go pull out that recipe card. What she did instead was go to the iPad in the bakery and pulled up the recipe for the cake of the week. And she immediately realized that what was in the flyer was not the cake of the week in the digital training platform. And so she immediately, and they didn't have the ingredients to bake the one that was in the flyer. And so she immediately elevated this to management, who realized there was a misprint in the flyer, and they were able to communicate that mistake across their entire grocery store network so that the associates were able to address that issue if customers came in looking for the different cake. So again, having the right knowledge and information right there in a couple of clicks can be really essential to a variety of business outcomes. Another part of making it seamless for associates is allowing them to choose their language and even deal with, as we've run across in a number of cases, literacy issues. Technology is now in place where we can overcome these hurdles, like using AI for automated translation and captioning. Single sign-on is probably the most common requirement we see in learning platforms when they're being launched. But we're now also seeing a move to something called common credentials. And much like the corporate workforce, frontline workers should be able to access their learning tools just like they access what other work systems they use. So in some cases, that could be SSO. It could be a common username or password, could be swiping their ID badge, depending on what your IT setup is and how people access tools throughout the day. It really needs to match the experience that they're having. Another barrier many LMSs have is not being schedule aware. So frontline workers are often technically not allowed to access learning after hours or off the clock. And so it's important to have your learning platform be able to adapt when an employee is working or not. And so, really critical to have the different parts of the experience for the frontline employee be aligned. And then finally, the learning experience has to be fast and relevant for the individual, delivering targeted, adaptive, short bites of information based on what that associate has already demonstrated they know or don't know is going to get each person a competency way faster. And there's a lot of brain science around that. So the one size fits all, long form content delivered once, not reinforced, the kind of, one size fits all is just simply not effective to move each individual up the knowledge path. And so the use of adaptive learning that understands where each individual is and works to close their specific knowledge gaps is the best way to enable the frontline. A great example of that is Southeastern Grocers, who has about 45,000 frontline workers across 7 different states. And for the last 10 years, we've seen sustained engagement of 97% of frontline workers logging into do training 2 to 3 times a month. That is very atypical when learning is delivered through a traditional LMS. So why are they getting those kinds of results and that level of participation? It's because it is fast, it's accessible, and the content is relevant to each individual. So when the experience is desirable and the employee perceives it to be seamless and relevant to them, they just want to come back and do more. Human behavior is we all, no matter the role that we're in, we all want to do a good job typically. And a lot of that is rooted in how confident we are in our knowledge. On to the third challenge. So far we've talked about just getting people access into the learning system and making it easy. So let's talk now about what we do when we have their attention, because every single event matters in terms of what you're delivering. So all too often, we do what I just mentioned a moment ago. We fire hose our associates during onboarding with the entire universe of things that we think they need to know. And it really does become a boil the ocean exercise. One of my colleagues here at Exonify recently had his daughter join a fast food chain, and she's 17 years old. And he related to me that before she started, she was required to watch 9 hours of videos on every possible topic related to that location, and a lot of it having nothing to do with the job that she had been hired to do. And she started to watch them, got into the 5th hour, and then decided she actually didn't want to work there. And so, just that mind-numbing fire hose is not something people can digest, and really creates, doesn't get you off on the best foot with the frontline. We had another specialty retail customer who recently told us that they were challenged with a 45% drop-off rate during their onboarding because it was boring, it was way too long, and it wasn't perceived to be relevant. And so, another example of you can turn off your learner before they even get started. And so make the most of every single visit to your learning platform. It's an opportunity to demonstrate value, and every negative experience impacts a whole host of things related to your organization, including sales, reduction of expenses, and things like that. And I will give you a brief example of another customer and how they think about onboarding a little bit later. Now I'm going to turn to a different example, and that's a hardware store that does illustrate this fire hose point I was making. How many products do you think a typical hardware employee needs to know? Well, it certainly isn't the 50,000 SKUs that are often on the shelves in a hardware store. And there just simply is no way anybody could possibly get trained on that or train on that and have the associate remember all of that information. Just no way. So really being thoughtful about the content that matters to that job role, and by topic, prioritizing the topics. Those things are essential to performance. And it is incredible to me that, we see customers when they come to us say, we've got 10,000 topics that we need to get on Exonify. And quite literally, 9,000 of them haven't been used in 10 years. And so you can't, used as in they're not relevant anymore. So they want them there. They want them to be available. They want to use them from time to time, but they're just not relevant anymore. So with that limited time that you do have with your frontline team member, you really do need to get away from this idea that boiling the ocean, doing that long form, heavy, got to pack it all in at the outset approach is just not a winning approach. There is no brain that remembers all of that. In fact, the typical human remembers 5% of what they got trained on 30 days earlier. That's it. And so it's this lack of ongoing reinforcement that becomes a real issue with traditional training, especially with the frontline. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that every year we conduct research using a third party and publish something we call the Deskless Report, where we look at the current state of frontline work and how we can help associates have a great day on the job every single day. And as part of that, we ask employees, what's the most important training you feel you need help with? And then we ask the training leaders, the corporate team, what training they think the frontline employees need. And what you see on the screen here is there's a response we got last year from the frontline associates. And interestingly, when you compare the list to what the learning leaders show as most important, there are many of the topics you see here that are kind of backwards in terms of what they see as priority items. And I'll give you an example of that. Customer service, often from the training team, is seen as paramount. And as you can see here, it's on the smaller tail of this graph from an associate's point of view. So we had an interesting experience with a specialty retailer where the learning leader said to us that the biggest thing he wanted to impact was that when a customer walked in the store and needed to ask a question, that the associate didn't run and hide behind a shelf and avoid addressing the customer. And he interpreted that to being, we need to train on customer service topics. It turned out that the issue was the associates did not feel that they had enough product knowledge to adequately answer a question. And what they didn't want to do was get into an uncomfortable situation with a customer because they didn't have the answers that they needed. So as you can see here, the second most prevalent need is product knowledge. So it's interesting how there is that difference in what is actually needed versus what you think they need. And so asking the associates is critical to be able to deliver to them the targeted information that they need in order to result in high performance. So the fourth barrier that I want to talk about is also something I touched on a moment ago, and it does bear further discussion. Personalization of learning or adaptiveness of learning right down to the level of each associate isn't just possible now, but it is incredibly important. So technology has made this entirely possible. So the one-size-fits-all experience, which we know is highly ineffective, doesn't need to happen anymore. Adaptive learning algorithms can instantly track where each person is on their learning journey. And so not just what they've seen or watched or, the things that you check the box around, but what they actually know or don't know in critical topic areas so that the right ongoing reinforcement and closing of learning gaps can happen person by person. These adaptive algorithms allow us to deliver a totally different training experience to your newest associates compared to those who may have been around and are very seasoned in exactly the same role. And you can even assess levels of confidence in their knowledge as they go through the content. And it turns out that an associate's confidence in what they know has a very direct correlation to how they behave and what they do on the job. And so understanding confidence, whether they're overconfident or underconfident, is also critical to adapting the learning to each individual to close the gaps and get them to act in the ways that you need them to. So not only is just the core learning about the job role, and the standard operating procedures and things they need to know to do their day-to-day jobs key, but also key is providing access to performance support in the flow of work. It's really equally important. So back to that, 50,000 SKU example in a hardware store. If an associate's approached by a customer and is being asked about the features and benefits of a new paint, having that information, what we call 2 clicks, 10 seconds, is really going to help the associate make the sale. So giving them the confidence that they can access the right information instantly leads to the right kinds of outcomes for the business. There's also, it wouldn't be a presentation if we didn't mention AI. There's a big opportunity right now with digital assistants and AI. So imagine you giving your associate a more knowledgeable and reliable assistant that can quickly search your database while they're on the floor and answer a very detailed question from a customer that they may not have the answer to. And I'll give you a quick example of a live example of that in a moment. So back to the hardware example again. We have an organization we work with that has 1,700 stores, 280,000 associates, and is using a lot of the techniques we talked about today to drive training adoption. They have associates coming back to the platform multiple times a week. And because a large part of their workforce is part-time, those, when you think about, logging in multiple times a week, most are doing it every single shift. We recently had an L&D leader share a story where a customer asked an associate about a specific product. The associate didn't have the answer, but knew it was recently featured in her training. She remembered that. And so instead of saying, I don't know, she pulled out her mobile device, quickly logged on and asked her AI assistant and found the answer. And that resulted in a 10 out of 10 customer survey at the checkout. And all of those things, of course, roll up to better business outcomes, better sales, more retention of your workforce, because everybody is happier. So just a great example of how we can take frontline tech to another place beyond just structured training. Before we move on, any other questions, Scott, from the audience that have come in? I want to take a pause there.
Yeah, we do have one here. They're asking, we're heading into seasonal hiring, so I'm interested in knowing how this can help me prioritize employee retention and turnover.
Yeah. So, many of the organizations we work for have very seasonal business. And so we have tons and tons of data to show, interestingly, that employees who are engaged with training and look for more ways to get knowledgeable turn over materially less. So just giving them access to knowledge and information in a way they can get it easily shows a very direct correlation to getting them up to speed quickly. So, it's seasonal work. They can get active and activate very, very quickly. And they will turn over less. So yeah, really, really interesting, data to show active engagement with learning has a material impact on retention.
Excellent. Thanks for the question.
The fourth challenge, we're getting towards the end here, is making the connection between your LMS solution, your learning solution, and other training modalities that are necessary for the frontline worker to do their job. It isn't just enough to provide digital training. That in and of itself is not enough, particularly for that audience. Frontline workers also typically require very hands-on training, usually working alongside a trusted peer or a manager. So learning how to operate a forklift requires you to drive a forklift. Learning how to sell, very high-end clothing, purses, accessories, often requires you to have certain skills. So how do we leverage technology to improve that hands-on experience for people who are practicing those skills? So the question is, does your technology allow you to do things like provide task lists digitally that pair or connect with the learning that individual has done, so that when they complete the task, how that relates to their knowledge profile? So do you have that ability to, as they're doing things and actively working, having them check things off, tie that to learning? That's one way these connections can be made. But a second connection, and we see this frequently, is that managers are tasked with assessing employee performance. So working with them, training them hands-on, and assessing their performance. And unfortunately, all too often it stops there. They watch the employee do something, they say good, not good, maybe give some feedback, and that's where it ends. The best technology solutions today allow that manager to observe, capture those observations digitally, and then tie it to the knowledge and information that that employee has demonstrated that they have or don't have in the topic areas related to that particular skill. And so the ability to tie all of these things together, task completion, observations, and all of it rooted in the skills that that employee has and has demonstrated they have and the knowledge they have is totally capable today and highly impactful when it comes to the manager being able to effectively coach the individual. So managers often don't have structured ways to do that through an LMS today. Another really interesting thing, and we saw this through the pandemic, was that communication that is not just structured learning, but being delivered through the learning platform can be an absolutely ideal way to reach the associates with the knowledge and information that may not be related to specifically what they need to do that day. And so it could be corporate information, it could be bulletins, it could be safety warnings, it could be a whole bunch of things. And so being able to tie communications through a learning portal where you have access to those individuals in ways you might not otherwise have access to them or be able to reach them has become another huge way to get the most out of your LMS. And I think I skipped over this slide, so I should have had been on this slide when I was just saying that. So I'm going to move on to the next one. This is an example of a large retailer that blends the digital and real life experience as part of their onboarding program. And you can see here how they've broken down the onboarding experience by shift and then by a series of days because they know how critical the first 30 days are to a new hire. And what's particularly interesting is that they actually limit the amount of training that can happen in the first and second shifts because they know it's critical to focus on relationship building, and that cramming too much information into people's heads is not something that's going to be a good experience for them, and they won't be able to retain it. So they apply this experience across their global workforce to create a more consistent onboarding experience, limit the workload on managers, and make sure learning actually matches how people learn on the job instead of, again, trying to overwhelm them with information. So we're going to wrap up by talking about the last challenge, which is what happens after onboarding. And, I said it earlier, often onboarding is the last time associates hear about learning. It ends there. And unfortunately, that does not reflect the pace of change in your business. You need employees frequently coming back to learn more. So going back to our original distribution center example, this organization has 3 critical KPIs that tie to learning: safety, compliance, and productivity. And getting their associates to come back and learn additional topics as these things frequently change is utterly critical to performance. So, I mentioned this earlier. Increasingly, organizations are realizing that combining daily on-the-fly communication with their learning platform encourages associates to get the latest and greatest information immediately. But while they're there, it encourages them to do a quick 3 minutes of very targeted learning around the things they need to know to do their job well in the flow of work. So if a safety incident happens, that can be communicated instantly, and they can also do a little quick hit of training on that particular safety topic. Something else we often talk about is a lot, because it drives a high degree of daily voluntary participation, is gamification. We use many, many different game mechanics. One of the most interesting ones is something called Tell a Friend, where if someone is not logging into the platform frequently, we alert their peers, and their peers can nudge that individual to get in and do their daily training. And when they do, if the individual does get on, they get rewarded for that, and they just love it. The number of people who nudge others to do their daily training is literally, it's millions of people a day, and that are saying, hey, I saw, you didn't do it yesterday, and could you do it today, because I'm going to get some additional points. In fact, our data clearly shows that rewarding learning in a variety of ways isn't just possible, it drives the right behavior with the frontline in terms of that knowledge acquisition. There are lots of gamification techniques that are based on both intrinsic and extrinsic factors that are highly, highly effective in encouraging people to learn continuously. So when you embed those in your learning program, people will do it, they'll do the right things in your business, and you'll get the business outcomes intended. Also, making engagement with learning part of your manager's KPIs is another great way to encourage ongoing growth and development of the entire team. So, touching really quickly on learning as it relates to business outcomes, because we collect daily continuous data around specific learning success person by person, we are able to statistically correlate the participation and knowledge of the frontline down to the level of the person with key business results. So an example of that, distribution center where we've got over 90% of tens of thousands of people participating 2 to 3 times per week. Statistically, using machine learning, that level of participation and the knowledge growth of those individuals is correlated to a 54% reduction in safety incidents. That is literally tens of millions of dollars a year in reduction of safety incidents. So all of these things are possible with technology today. Now that I've covered the 5 challenges, I want to get a quick pulse check on how you feel about your current technology. Is it meeting the needs of your frontline?
Yeah,
Scott.
so the question's up there. Yeah, and so we'll leave that open for just a minute because we're coming up on time here. But yeah, if you could say how you would rate the effectiveness of your current learning technology and meeting needs of your frontline employees, that would love to see what you have to say there. And Carol, that statistic on the reduction in workplace injuries is amazing, and I mean that's such a high value, just economically and in terms of worker safety. That's an amazing figure.
Yeah. Super.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and push this one out, and it looks like somewhat effective is the clear winner on this question.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you got some additional tips and tricks that you can take back and make it very effective, which I'm glad to see that looks like about 25% of you feel your programs are, which is amazing. So last slide, quick recap of what we think your technology needs to do for your frontline from a digital perspective. So take this checklist away, have a look at what your organization is doing, and hopefully you can take away some of these suggestions and really get to a more effective learning program for your frontline. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, Carol, thanks. That was a great presentation. We probably got time for maybe one question here, but we will leave this slide up here in case anybody wants to do a screen grab. Great checklist here. The question here is, how can we overcome resistance to change and ensure buy-in from frontline employees and managers?
What I would say is this: it's a real concern. And we have a series of best practices we've developed over many years to make the launch highly effective. What I know is this: all of the things I talked about, if you make it easily accessible, fast, fun, rewarding, gamification, I can tell you, drives a ton of initial interest. And just the rewards and recognition people get if they understand that their participation is going to bring good things for them. And some of those good things are, you're just going to be better at your job and also put yourself in line for promotion. All of those sorts of things, if baked into a launch program, make an amazing level of initial interest, and then building the habit of doing this daily. And we've seen it over and over and over again.
Okay. Well, Carol, I wish we had more time. I'd love to go into so much more about the gamification. I'd love to know where people are putting up these QR codes. I'd like to know how like their whole training programs have shifted. When they get out of those two places they traditionally train. But unfortunately, we're out of time here. I'm sure the audience has a lot of the same questions. If they want to learn more or find out more, what do you recommend that they do?
I would say definitely reach out, go on our website. We've got lots of resources on the website. Anybody here is happy to chat. We're easy to find, exotify.com. And yeah, definitely reach out.
Okay. Well, Carol, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate this presentation.
Thank you.
All right. And for our last piece of business here today, we do have the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 gift card today is Sabina Alexander from Missouri. So congratulations to Sabina. We'll be in touch to get you your card. So last reminder about that resource and the handouts that you can grab as well, as well as checking out the website for more information. But with that, on behalf of the Smart Brief team, I want to thank Exotify for making this event possible. And thanks so much for attending and for your participation in the polls and putting in your frontline jobs and for your great questions. Great event. Really appreciate your participation. So that concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.